Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 205, the Screen Actors Guild. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having arrived in a big town and deciding to explore the area. However, while they do so, they hear a crowd of women scream and run down the street right past Ash and the gang, much to Brock's dismay, as he assumed when he heard screaming, excited girls that they had started screaming as soon as they heard that he came into town. Obviously not though, Brock, come on. The girls confirm their disinterest in Brock as they run past. And although Brock was depressed by the fact that he didn't have any potential girls interested in him, he still thought they were beautiful as fuck, so decided to chase after them anyways, leading Ash and Misty to follow him. However, Ash and the gang are then stopped in their tracks before they can catch up to the girls by a mysterious man wearing a top hat. He was holding something contained in yellow cloth and hands it to Ash and the gang, instructing them to keep what he just gave them for a while, though assuring that he would come back for it eventually. Ash and the gang questioned why they were being entrusted with whatever was in this package, with the man revealing that he needed to run away as quickly as he could so all of the approaching women wouldn't see him. Ash and the gang tried to inquire further, but the man ran off as fast as possible, dropping his top hat in the process. Ash was curious to know what was inside the package, so he unwraps it and finds none other than a pretty Pokemon inside, as it was smiling immensely, despite just being fucking abandoned by its trainer. Ash and Misty were immediately enamored by this Pokemon's smile, finding it extremely cute, and the Pokemon must have found Ash and Misty, as well as Pikachu, extremely cute as well, as it proceeded to kiss them on the cheek, even though it had to jump out of Ash's arms to kiss Misty, and then jump even further to kiss Pikachu, as Pikachu didn't want to be kissed, so it tried to run away, but Smoochum didn't let it get away, catching up to Pikachu almost immediately as it ran after it. However, it decided to merely greet Pikachu with a smile, as opposed to kissing it, not wanting to make it super uncomfortable. Brock then reveals that he had heard of this Pokemon before, stating that it was Smoochum, the pre-evolution of Jinx. Knowing this, Ash scans Smoochum with his Pokedex, which reveals that Smoochum uses its kisses as its sense of touch, and finds out if it would get along with another Pokemon by kissing it. As if on cue, the Smoochum then kisses Pikachu, even though it initially decided not to, since it just couldn't fucking help itself, and then it walks up to Brock and kisses him as well. Damn, I guess Brock did finally get a kiss. Just then, Smoochum spots the man's dropped top hat, and immediately goes up to it to kiss it so it can use its sense of touch. After doing so, it immediately wants to put on the hat, so it tries to, although the hat was too large for it, so when it began to walk with it on, the hat almost fell off, because it was too big. In an effort to keep the hat on, it almost falls over, leading it to bump into Brock, who takes off the hat and readjusts it so that it fits better. Upon seeing the Smoochum rock this hat, Brock got the idea to have it put on a dancing performance that would likely attract all of the girls who had ran past him, due to the Smoochum's cuteness. Brock suggests that Ash, Misty, and Togepi get involved too, with Ash and Misty being backup dancers, and Togepi being the one to play a tambourine, so there was music to dance to. Brock coming up with this suggestion due to remembering how much Togepi liked the tambourine, as it played it for the Wooper back in that one episode. Sure enough, this awesome performance causes all the girls from earlier to rush over to Brock, who had decided to put the hat on himself as opposed to the Smoochum, thinking that if he danced, then he could attract the girls, instead of letting Smoochum get all the fame. This worked. Brock soon realizes that the women were not interested in the Smoochum or its dancing, but instead actually seemed to be interested in him, which made him extremely happy. He was even happy as all of the girls trampled over him and Ash and the gang, super excited to get close to Brock. While they trample Ash and the gang, and squash and elbow all, this causes Pikachu and Misty to go flying out of Ash and Misty's hands respectively, and causes Smoochum to go flying in their direction as well. When Togepi and Smoochum get up, they realized that they were being watched by something, being a Skiploom mech that was flying around. Noting that the Skiploom mech seemed to have taken interest in Togepi and Smoochum, they eagerly follow the Skiploom mech into an alley, wanting to know what its deal was. Pikachu saw Togepi and Smoochum run off after the Skiploom mech, and Pikachu knew that since it was a mech, it was likely trouble, so he tried to warn Ash that Smoochum and Togepi had went after it, but since all the girls were being extremely loud around Brock, Ash couldn't hear Pikachu, so Pikachu decided to just chase after Togepi and Smoochum himself, taking matters into his own hands. Meanwhile, Brock, amazed with all the attention he was getting from ladies for once, proceeded to take off the top hat and bow to the girls, showing his respect for them, being a simp as usual. But unfortunately for him, when he took the hat off, this backfired, as the girls quickly depart, since they realized that Brock wasn't who they thought he was, indicating that they thought that Brock was actually the man who was in the top hat earlier, who tried to run away from the women, calling his name Brad as they ran away looking for him. Brock was so shocked by the women's sudden departure that he didn't hear the women call out for Brad, so he just assumed that the only reason why the women departed was because they thought he was ugly without his hat. So he simply put the hat back on, hoping that the women would return, but they obviously didn't, which made him pass out in sadness, questioning why the girls wouldn't come back to him, leading Ash to reveal that the girls had mentioned a guy named Brad, and teased Brock that it seemed like the only way the girls would come back to him was if Brock was able to magically transform into Brad. Just then, Misty notices an ad for a movie being played on one of the billboards in town. As Ash and the gang watch the ad, they see that the main star of the movie, who was fighting some villains, was played by none other than the man that had gave Ash the Smoochum earlier, indicating that the man was an actor. Ash and the gang were shocked by this, and they were even more shocked as they then saw the credits for the movie play at the end of the ad, which revealed that the main actor's name was Brad Van Dern, who was specifically known for starring in action movies. So therefore, Ash and the gang come to the conclusion that the man that all the women were looking for was none other than the man who had gave Ash and the gang the smoochum, revealing, of course, why he was running away from those women, since the women wanted him so bad. As Ash and Brock watched the billboard, waiting for the trailer to cycle around again so they could get a better look, Misty goes to ask Smoochum, Togepi, and Pikachu what they thought of the trailer, only to realize that they were gone. She informs Ash and Brock of this, and the three of them immediately go searching, Ash and Brock happily abandoning the chance to watch the movie again. Speaking of Pikachu, Togepi, and Smoochum had since tried to run away from the Skiploom mech, since they had realized that it just wouldn't leave them alone at this point. Since they had originally thought that the Skiploom mech was just leading them to an alley in a little chase game, and then the Skiploom mech would leave. But as soon as they reached the end of the alleyway, the Skiploom continued to follow. So that's what freaked Togepi and Smoochum out, as they began to run away, as the Skiploom mech continued to follow them still, with Pikachu also pursuing both the mech and Togepi and Smoochum, wanting to make sure nothing bad happened to Togepi and Smoochum. It's then revealed that the Skiploom mech belonged to Team Rocket. They were watching the Skiploom mech's view from a video feed, and were very glad to find out that the Skiploom mech had successfully tracked down Togepi and Pikachu, which Meowth had programmed it to do, and were even more pleased to see that it had also found a Smoochum with them, because even though they didn't initially plan to catch a Smoochum, more Pokemon the better. Team Rocket then see Togepi and Pikachu and Smoochum all approaching their building they were staying at, with the Skiploom mech following them. This was just as Team Rocket intended, as since Togepi and Smoochum were so scared by the Skiploom mech, they jumped into the hole, trapping themselves inside Team Rocket's building. Pikachu tries to follow Togepi and Smoochum into the hole, but the Skiploom mech catches up first and blocks off the hole from Pikachu so that Pikachu couldn't get in. This allows Team Rocket to retrieve Togepi and Smoochum, who had since jumped into their building, which gets Pikachu mad as he spotted that Team Rocket were the ones behind the Skiploom mech, so he attacks the Skiploom mech, knocking it over, allowing himself to get into the hole. However, he was too big to fit through the small hole, so he ended up getting stuck. He tries his best to struggle out of the hole and get to Team Rocket. However, Team Rocket get to him first, and Jessie gets excited at how Pikachu was now stuck, so it couldn't do anything to stop her from grabbing it. She then puts on some rubber gloves and reaches out for Pikachu. But James and Meowth panic that Pikachu would proceed to Thundershock Jessie and warn her about this, as Pikachu was in fact gearing up for a Thunderbolt, but Jessie simply laughed as she reminded James and Meowth that she had put on some rubber gloves. So when Pikachu did fire Thunderbolt, it did absolutely nothing to her, and Jessie was able to retrieve Pikachu from the hole, stretching its face and poking it, extremely happy to have Pikachu in her hands. And all of this prodding causes Pikachu to get pissed off as he tries to Thunderbolt yet again, but unfortunately he can't, and Jessie puts him inside a rubber sack, so he was now captured and still couldn't use Thunderbolt. As Jessie celebrates finally catching Pikachu, James reminds her of the icing on the cake being Togepi and Smoochum. Jessie then directs her attention to Smoochum, who proceeds to use a charm attack on her as it winks at her, which makes Jessie become extremely enamored by Smoochum's cuteness, to the point where Jessie picks Smoochum up and begins cuddling it. This makes Smoochum happy, as it loved getting affection, and wanted to show Jessie some affection back by kissing her. However, even under the charm, Jessie gets annoyed by all these sloppy kisses and begins to yell at Smoochum right as Ash and the gang arrive, having tracked down Smoochum, Togepi, and Pikachu, somehow. Likely being alerted to Team Rocket's building after they had heard Jessie yelling at the Smoochum. When they spot Jessie yelling at the Smoochum, they immediately tell her to stop and give Smoochum back. However, Jessie rebuttals that Ash didn't have Pikachu, so therefore he couldn't do that much against Team Rocket to stop them. Upon hearing that Team Rocket had captured Pikachu, this just makes Ash even more angry, and he wants to prove to Team Rocket that he didn't need Pikachu to beat their asses. So he sends out Bayleaf and Totodile. He has Bayleaf use Razor Leaf, and it instantly makes contact with the rubber bag holding Pikachu, cutting the bag and setting Pikachu free. In fear of Pikachu potentially using Thunderbolt, James has Jessie give him Smoochum, and he also picks up Togepi, grasping them tightly in his hands. However, Totodile uses Water Gun to knock Smoochum and Togepi out of James's hands, causing them to fall, but before they fall on the ground and potentially injure themselves due to how small they were, Ash has Bayleaf use Vine Whip to catch them in it. Not wanting Ash and the gang to get away with their captures, Meowth goes over to the Skiploom robot with a remote control and begins controlling it, directing it to attack Ash's Bayleaf. However, Totodile gets in the way by spraying the Skiploom robot with a water gun, which short-circuits the Skiploom robot, destroying it. Totodile then uses Water Gun again to soak Meowth, Jessie, and James, and since Team Rocket were wet, they were very much susceptible to Pikachu's Thunderbolt, more so than usual, so Pikachu uses it and is easily able to send Team Rocket blasting off. Ash cheers on all the Pokemon for doing their best to stop Team Rocket, and Misty retrieves her Togepi, while Ash retrieves the Smoochum, and the both of them make sure that the Pokemon were unharmed. Much to Ash and Misty's delight, they were. Just then, Smoochum tried to kiss Ash, since it was in love with him for doing his best to save it. However, Ash denied the kiss, stating that he didn't deserve it. Meanwhile, Brad was enjoying having some time away from his mob of female fans when he suddenly realized that he still left his Smoochum with Ash and the gang and hadn't gone back for it yet. So he immediately began to worry, as he yelled out for Smoochum and ran to go find Ash and the gang, although he unfortunately couldn't find it, even when he returned to the spot where he had gave Smoochum to Ash and the gang. This obviously frustrated Brad, although he should have fucking realized that Ash and the gang would have left the original location by now. He proceeds to call out for Smoochum some more, but this only ends up attracting not his Smoochum, but all of his fangirls yet again, as they recognized his voice. So they run up to him, and when Brad is faced with the horror of potentially being run over by his fans, he remembers that he had left Smoochum with Ash and the gang because he was running away from the fans in the first place. So the fans may have spotted Ash and the gang and his Smoochum and ran them over and injured his Smoochum in the process. Brad then looked at all of the women as they approached him to see if any of them had picked up Smoochum if they ran over it, although unfortunately he didn't see Smoochum in any of their arms, so Smoochum must have been somewhere else. As Brad hoped that the Smoochum wasn't absolutely kicked to death and went to go find his Smoochum, he found that he was blocked by all of his fans and couldn't escape. Thankfully, though, a limousine driven by his manager Vitzo pulled up, and then Vitzo rolled the window down and instructed Brad to get in, scolding him for roaming the streets, since he should have known that he would have been mobbed by fans. Although Brad wanted to find Smoochum, he didn't want to get trampled by his fans, and he also didn't want to upset Vitzo, so he got inside the limousine as it drove off. Unfortunately for Brad, if he would have just stayed around for a bit longer, he would have spotted Ash and the gang and his Smoochum, who, coincidentally, were now walking down the same street, also looking for Brad, since they were determined to give Smoochum back to him now, not wanting to be responsible for Smoochum potentially getting into any more danger. Just then, Smoochum gets excited, as it notices Brad's limo driving by, and this leads Ash and the gang to come to the conclusion that Brad must have been inside the limo, so they run up to it as it continues to drive away. Sure enough, Ash and the gang notice Brad in the window and become determined to chase after the limo to return Smoochum. However, the limo is too fast and it gets away, even as Ash and the gang yell at it for it to come back. Fortunately, while Ash and the gang were running after the limousine, although they couldn't catch up to it, they did overhear one of Brad's fans state that Brad was probably on his way to the local stadium theater to perform a show later, but the fan also complained that there was probably going to be a huge line to get in. Ash and the gang weren't excited by the fact of having to wait in the line, but they decided that they were going to have to if this stadium was the only place where they could find Brad. So they ran to the stadium, following the limousine. Sure enough though, the fan was right, and the line to get in the stadium was long as fuck, so Ash and the gang couldn't get in. They tried to get in by going through the stadium waiting room as well, but they were quickly kicked out due to not having permission to be in the waiting room, despite Ash claiming that he had to reunite Smoochum with Brad. Just when Ash and the gang were kicked out, Brad had arrived at the stadium and went inside the waiting room, and he paced around anxiously as he knew that he couldn't perform his show without his Smoochum. He was even more worried as he had not yet told Vitzo yet, knowing that Vitzo would likely force him to go on to perform even without his Smoochum. Sure enough, when Vitzo finishes parking the limo and joins Brad inside the waiting room, and Brad reveals to him that he couldn't perform without his Smoochum, Vitzo reacts by reminding Brad that he had to go on whether he liked it or not, since they had signed a contract with the stadium owners, and adds that Brad didn't even need Smoochum anyways, and suggests that he gets a Pokemon that was tougher to fit his image as an action movie star, such as Charizard or a Houndoom. Just then, a fan who was trying to spy on Brad through the waiting room window noticed that Brad's Smoochum wasn't with him, and immediately began to get sad. Brad uses this as evidence that he did need Smoochum, since all of his fans appreciated it, but Vitzo wasn't convinced, still adamant that Brad should get a Houndoom or Charizard instead. Ironically, Vitzo's continued suggestions make Brad extremely angry, about as angry as a Charizard or Houndoom, as he states that he would never get rid of his Smoochum if he found it again, and stating that he would never think of owning a Charizard or Houndoom, as he didn't want to portray himself as an angry man like Charizard and Houndoom were. Vitzo tried to explain that Charizard and Houndoom weren't always angry, and could get him just as much fame and money as his Smoochum had helped him acquire. Brad rebuttals that no money was worth more to him than his Smoochum and all of his memories with it, as he explained that it was solely because of Smoochum that he was motivated to become a movie star in the first place, since Smoochum had encouraged him to continue following his dreams of becoming a movie star by showing him love and affection, even if Brad had failed his acting or dancing lessons. Brad then reveals that he had once given up fully on his dream of becoming a movie star and settled for washing dishes at a restaurant, but it was because of his Smoochum's motivation yet again that he was determined to stop washing dishes and try again to become a movie star, and that time he was successful. This leads Vitzo to retort that Brad could end up being forced to wash dishes again if he stayed too focused on trying to find his Smoochum instead of going out to the show in time, stating that if he messed up his contract, then he would lose his career as a movie star. This led Brad to begin debating what he should do, although he was determined to not start the show without his Smoochum unless he was absolutely forced to. Meanwhile, back outside the stadium, Ash and the gang were stressed as they couldn't find a way to get in to reunite Brad with his Smoochum. Misty was particularly worried, but Ash was trying to not let his worries get to him, and he tried to overwrite his worries with his determination to get Smoochum back to Brad, and it's because of his determination that he was able to think of an idea as he spotted a large tree that led up to the window of the waiting room that Brad was in. So he came to the conclusion that he should climb the tree to get up into the waiting room, stating that he's climbed bigger trees when he was just a little kid, so it should be no problem for him. So he puts Smoochum on his back, telling it to hang on as he climbs up the tree to reach the window, which was on the second story of the waiting room building. So it was quite the trek up, and Smoochum began to get frightened while Ash was climbing as it cried out. Brad was able to hear Smoochum's cry, so he ran to the window thinking that Smoochum may have been outside. But Vitzo stops him, also having heard Smoochum, and informs him that he would check outside the window for him. His plan was to make sure that Brad didn't see his Smoochum so that he wouldn't get reunited with it and be forced to pick a new Pokemon, such as Houndoom or Charizard. So, as soon as he ran up to the window and in fact saw Smoochum, he immediately shut the window and closed the curtains so that Brad couldn't see Smoochum if he walked up to the window. Brad then questions Vitzo what he saw out the window, with Vitzo lying that all that the noise was some squealing fangirls, and told Brad that he shouldn't worry about it and just hurry off to the show so that he wouldn't miss it. Brad rebutted that he obviously wouldn't go do the show without his smoochum, leading Vitzo to lie that he would try and find Smoochum himself as long as Brad proceeded to get ready for the show. Brad refused, stating he wanted to find Smoochum himself, leading Vitzo to practically force Brad out of the waiting room, telling him to go on now, shutting the door so that Brad couldn't come back in. Right as the door shut, Brad thought that he had heard Smoochum again, and sure enough, he did. As Ash and Smoochum both tried to get Brad's attention by calling out to him, although, since Brad was already out of the waiting room, Ash and Smoochum's yells did absolutely nothing. Ash then noticed that since the show was about to begin, a lot of the people in the line had already entered the stadium by this point, so the line was now a lot shorter. So, Ash and Smoochum, along with Misty and Brock, went to the line once again, and eventually were able to make it to the stadium entrance. However, now that Brad was in his dressing room getting all set up for the show, Vitzo had decided to make sure that no one undesirable could get into the show by guarding the line. So, when Ash and the gang were about to enter the stadium, Vitzo was there and stopped them. Ash and the gang tried to explain to Vitzo that they were there to give Brad his smoochum back, leading Vitzo to lie that Brad didn't want his smoochum anymore and insisted that Ash and the gang could keep it, explaining that Brad was too busy to even come out to give it a formal goodbye. Ash and the gang obviously don't believe this, as they don't believe that Brad would have gave them his smoochum to protect and stated that he was going to come back for it if he didn't actually plan to come back for it. So, Ash questioned if what Vitzo said was really true, as suddenly, Brad comes out of the stadium from his dressing room and goes to talk to Vitzo to ask him if he had located Smoochum yet, only to see his Smoochum with Ash and the gang, and get extremely happy, as he thanks Ash and the gang for returning Smoochum to him. Although Smoochum was a little bit hesitant to join Brad yet again, as it had grown attached to Ash and the gang, it couldn't help itself as it began running towards Brad, jumping into his arms, and kissing him. Vitzo decided to give up on his plan on making Brad get either a Charizard or a Houndoom, but he still wasn't thrilled that Smoochum was back, as he feared that if all of Brad's fangirls saw Brad kissing the Smoochum, they would become so overjoyed and proceed to run over both him and Brad in an attempt to get close to the Smoochum. So, he permits Brad to keep his Smoochum, but ushers him and Ash and the gang into a secret green room in the stadium so that Brad could continue talking with his Smoochum without the fear of the fans approaching him. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was using their binoculars to spy on Ash and the gang and Brad, and saw that Brad had reunited with Smoochum. Meowth was the first one to spot Smoochum, despite Jessie being absolutely desperate to, due to still being charmed by the Smoochum and loving it no matter what, so she was extremely desperate to see it. When Meowth confirmed that Smoochum was there, Jessie was made extremely happy by this, and this freaked Meowth out, as he wasn't used to seeing Jessie acting nice and kind towards a Pokemon instead of rough and mean as usual, and stated how Jessie acting nice was more scary than when she was mean. Meowth then remembered how Jessie was also charmed by a Teddiursa in that one episode, and worried that her being charmed by this Smoochum could have a similar effect. Hearing Meowth's concerns, this made Jessie state that, although she did find Teddiursa cute, Smoochum was on a whole different planet. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang, Vitzo, and Brad were in the secret green room that Vitzo had took them to, where Brad and Smoochum were still showing each other affection, with Brad petting Smoochum and giving her favorite soup, which made her extremely happy, obviously thinking that the soup was delicious. Ash and the gang saw how Brad was treating the Smoochum, and were impressed at how kind he was to it, although they were shocked that Brad appeared to be so lovey-dovey towards anything, since he was an action movie star. They viewed him as a tough guy, and this wasn't the case. When Vitzo noticed that Ash and the gang had pointed out that Brad wasn't as tough as his characters that he played, Vitzo pounded on his desk in anger and demanded that Ash and the gang don't mention Brad's true nature to anyone, as it could ruin his image of a super tough action star. He also adds that if Ash and the gang did tell anyone, then he would sue their asses extremely hard. Vitzo's yelling caused Smoochum to stop eating its delicious soup and instead start crying, as it was very upset by Vitzo's anger. To cheer Smoochum up, Brad shows it his dressing room through the window, leading Smoochum to want to go in there, but Brad declines, only because he was in a massive rush to get dressed, since the show was about to start, and Smoochum could potentially distract him. So, he kindly asked Ash and the gang to watch over Smoochum for him while he got dressed, and Ash and the gang happily obliged, as Brad went to his dressing room. Meanwhile, Vitzo had left several guards in charge of the front of the stadium to stop more people from coming in, since the audience was now at full capacity. So this, of course, made it harder for Team Rocket to get inside the stadium, but they simply just attacked the guards and tied them up, throwing them in a closet and gagging them so that they couldn't make any noise, and then stole their guard uniforms so that they could look like guards. And right as they do this, Vitzo then comes out to the stadium entrance to check on the guards, and somehow doesn't realize that Jessie and James looked a little different than the original guards, and requests that they come inside and use their force as guards to throw Ash and the gang and Smoochum out. Yes, that's right, Vitzo was still determined to get rid of Brad Smoochum. Vitzo gets a bit confused as the guards, quote-unquote, bow and thank Vitzo for the opportunity, which obviously confused Vitzo, because the guards shouldn't have been super happy to do their job. I mean, they were employees. It's not like they really enjoyed being guards. However, Jessie and James obviously did, because now they would have the opportunity to kick Ash and the gang out of the stadium so that they could ambush them and steal their Pokemon. Team Rocket obliges to Vitzo's request happily, and goes to the waiting room where Ash and the gang were, and demands that they get out. Ash and the gang rebuttal that they didn't do anything worthy of being kicked out, especially Brad smooch 'em, and add that Brad would likely want them to watch the show from backstage. Seeing how Ash and the gang wouldn't budge, Jesse and James decided to agree to Ash and the gang's demands and let them stay in the stadium and even escort them to the backstage. Team Rocket obviously didn't just lead Ash and the gang backstage to be kind, though. They decided to use Ash and the gang being amazed by how the backstage area was designed to their advantage, as they're able to catch Ash and the gang off guard, allowing Meowth to pull a net that was attached to a string that was attached to the spotlight on the ceiling of the backstage, and as a result, the net comes down and captures Ash and the gang, as Team Rocket then throw off their disguises and do their motto. Ash and the gang were very freaked out, and Jessie threatens them that if they tried to escape the net, then she would unleash her full power onto them with the help of her Pokemon. She then orders James and Meowth to pull the strings of the net to make the net go up and down in an attempt to shake Smoochum out of the net, since she wanted to put Smoochum in a special cage that she could keep to herself. Meowth and James were a bit hesitant, as they were worried that Ash and the gang would be able to escape the net if Smoochum could escape, but Jessie rebuttals that Smoochum was a lot smaller, so it would likely be a lot easier for it to fall out, and also adds that if Ash and the gang did escape, then she could just attack them with her Pokemon. Sure enough, Jessie was right, and when Meowth and James start pulling the strings of the net, causing it to shake, only Smoochum falls out, and Ash and the gang shake around violently, begging James and Meowth to stop. Jessie tells them to stop as well, saying that Smoochum was already out, so there was no need to do any more shaking, but James and Meowth were having fun at this point, torturing Ash and the gang, so they continue anyways. Meanwhile, Brad had returned to the green room area where Vitso currently was, and noticed that Ash and the gang and Smoochum were gone, so he came to the conclusion that Vitso must have threw them out, and he yells at Vitso, leading Vitso to yell back, denying that he would do such a thing, even though he obviously did. Brad knew this, so he went off to go searching for Smoochum and Ash and the gang. He searched the whole area, shouting extremely loudly and causing a whole bunch of ruckus with his speed of running, and James was actually able to hear all of this from backstage, and suggested that Jessie hurry up and capture the Smoochum in a cage already, worried that Brad would show up backstage and they would be caught red-handed. However, Jessie hesitated to put Smoochum inside the cage, worried that Smoochum would not like it. This was because Smoochum had used yet another charm on Jessie, so this effect made Jessie hesitant to do anything bad towards it. As for Meowth, he was getting extremely bored by Jessie's hesitance to put Smoochum into the cage, so he decided to kill the time by playing with what he thought was the rope attached to Ash and the gang's net. However, he realized that he had accidentally pulled the wrong rope, instead pulling the rope to open up the curtains, which in turn revealed Team Rocket to the audience of the show, as the curtains were obviously attached to backstage, and now backstage was revealed. Meowth and James are somewhat scared, but Jessie, on the other hand, is overjoyed to see the audience, and comes to the conclusion that she could finally fulfill her dreams of becoming an actress, as she walks out onto the stage with Smoochum. The audience was initially excited, as they assumed that Jessie was just the opening act, and soon Brad would come out, so all of the audience begins clapping for Jessie, hoping that it would earn them good graces with Brad, since Brad had obviously selected Jessie to be his opening act, so he thought that she was good enough. Well, that's what the audience thought anyways. As for Jessie, she thought that all of this applause was solely just for her act alone, not because she was supposedly involved with Brad in any way, so she thanks the crowd for the applause, and lies that the Smoochum was hers, and together they were going to be the stars of the show, and this entire show was just going to be them, which made the crowd extremely mad, as you would expect, as they began booing Jessie, demanding for Brad to come out. Jessie is obviously surprised and in anger at the audience's anger, and explains that she was the star of the show, whether the audience liked it or not some ugly-ass actor. This comment makes the audience even more mad, so Jessie gets the idea to calm them down by starting her performance and ordering around the Smoochum to do a whole bunch of dance moves, and the audience is obviously enamored by Smoochum's cuteness. Meanwhile, Vitso had begun chasing after Brad in an attempt to stop him from searching for Smoochum, and he was able to do so as he stopped Brad right as he was about to enter backstage. Brad demanded Vitso to get the fuck out of his way, expressing his worry that something may have happened to Ash and the gang and Smoochum after Vitso threw them out, such as them getting mauled by a rabid crowd of fangirls, leading Vitso to respond that he should just forget about Smoochum already and accept the fact that he was never going to see it again and simply just start performing his show. Just then, though, Brad hears Smoochum's voice coming from the stage as it was forced to dance around to try and please the crowd, so Brad manages to break through his manager, who was restraining him, and run onto the stage. Arriving backstage first, where he spots Ash and the gang captured inside the net, and Ash and the gang warn him that this was Team Rocket's doing, and Team Rocket were extremely dangerous. However, Brad didn't care about this, as he simply continued on to the actual stage, wanting to get his Smoochum back. Sure enough, Brad spots his Smoochum as soon as he arrives on stage, and is instantly happy again. When the audience spots Brad, they immediately switch from booing to cheering, which makes Jessie think that her idea of having Smoochum dance around was actually working, but then she turns around and notices that Brad was behind her, so she orders James to come out on the stage as well to help her out, as Brad waves to his fans and demands that Team Rocket give back his Smoochum and release Ash and the gang. Jessie and James respond by sending out their Weezing and Wobbuffet, leading the audience to applaud, believing that Jesse and James were simply the antagonists of the show, and Brad was the hero who was going to defeat them. Jesse and James order Wobbuffet and Weezing to attack Brad, but Wobbuffet was too distracted by the crowd wanting to show its stuff, so it shouts its name and begins dancing for the crowd, which just leaves the crowd confused, as they thought that Wobbuffet was supposed to be an evil villain Pokemon. Jesse scolds Wobbuffet for getting distracted and recalls it back into its Pokeball as punishment, leaving Weezing alone as James orders it to use Tackle on Brad. However, Brad was able to jump out of the way before Weezing made contact. Jesse then sent out her Arbok, so Weezing had some support, and has it use both Glare and Poison Sting, which Brad is able to dodge both attacks by doing several backflips and kicking Arbok in the face, which sent Arbok spinning towards the crowd, so now it was facing the crowd as it did Glare, which meant that the crowd was affected by the Glare, which essentially acted as a charm, meaning the crowd was obsessed with Arbok for a little bit. Bitso panics at this, stating that now the crowd may be too focused on Arbok to focus on Brad's show, and tells Brad to stop worrying about Smoochum and simply get on with the show while he still could. Brad yells back at Bitso, explaining that he couldn't get on with the show since Team Rocket was here anyways, and while he did this, Brad got a bit distracted, meaning that Weezing could sneak up on him and use a tackle attack. However, Brad was too stealthy and still managed to jump away in time, causing Weezing to miss the tackle and accidentally tackle Jesse's face instead, running into her. Since Jessie was holding Smoochum by this point, not wanting Brad to get it, when she gets hit in the face and knocked down, this allows Smoochum to jump out of her arms and try to escape off of the stage to safety by jumping off of it. However, Brad knew that if Smoochum jumped off the stage, it could get injured because of how small it was, so thankfully, Brad was able to catch it before it fell off. The crowd of fangirls goes absolutely wild, believing this to be one of Brad's stunts in his shows. However, the audience then gets confused as they see Brad stop fighting Team Rocket and hug his Smoochum, telling it that it meant everything to him and just saying a whole bunch of lovey-dovey things to it, making sure that Smoochum was okay. Vitzo's reaction to this was extreme worry, as he had his head buried in his hands, and he screamed out, worried that the crowd would become displeased by Brad ruining his tough guy image and becoming all lovey-dovey with his Smoochum. Ironically though, the crowd becomes more annoyed when they notice Vitzo and hear all of his complaining and screaming. Jessie uses the crowd being displeased to her advantage as she orders Arbok to use Headbutt on Brad, thinking that Brad would be distracted by the crowd, so she could get Smoochum back when Arbok knocked him down. However, Brad notices Arbok coming for him, and he comes up with a plan to save Ash and the gang, as he jumps out of the way of Arbok's headbutt, causing Arbok to go flying straight into Meowth, hitting him, knocking Meowth out. As a result, Meowth drops the rope attached to the net holding Ash and the gang, which he had since grabbed once again to move the net up and down. However, now that he had dropped the rope, this caused the net to fall down, freeing Ash and the gang. Ash and the gang then run up onto the stage, as Ash sends out his Bayleaf, ordering it to use Razor Leaf to attack Team Rocket, and Team Rocket are hit, but Jessie orders Arbok to attack back, leading Bayleaf to use Vine Whip to grab Arbok, stopping it in its tracks and tossing it, which stops Arbok from using Tackle and throws Arbok directly into Team Rocket, knocking them down. However, James quickly gets back up and orders his Weezing to use Smokescreen, doing this so he could blind Brad and Ash and the gang and catch them off guard. However, the smoke was affecting more than just Ash and the gang and Brad, as it was now spreading into the audience, blocking their view and making them cough. So Ash decided to help out the audience by sending out his Noctowl to use Whirlwind and blow the smokescreen away. Smoochum, wanting to obviously perform for the audience, was pissed off at Team Rocket for trying to blind them from its view with Smokescreen, so it decides to get involved and uses Sweet Kiss at Brad's command to extremely charm Team Rocket, making them now obsessed with Smoochum, so obsessed that they were unable to attack anymore because all they could focus on was looking at Smoochum. Pikachu took Team Rocket being distracted as an opportunity to use Thunderbolt and sent Team Rocket blasting off. This causes the crowd to cheer for both Brad and Smoochum, as well as Pikachu, amazed by what they still thought was a show. However, Brad then apologizes for ruining the show, explaining to the audience that none of this was an act. It was a genuine attempt from Team Rocket to steal his Smoochum, which he also revealed was his. The crowd was extremely excited at the fact that this actually wasn't a show, but real life. And they were so amazed by this that they didn't even pick up on the fact that Brad had just admitted that Smoochum was his, which the crowd didn't know, because although they had spotted Brad with a Smoochum multiple times, they didn't know it was his, and a lot of the fangirls only believed it was a rumor that he had a Smoochum. The audience then actually do realize that the Smoochum was Brad's, as Brad states how glad he was to have Smoochum back, and explains to the audience how him and Smoochum had been partners for a very long time, and he had cared for Smoochum. Since Brad did not want to hide the fact that he had Smoochum anymore, since he wanted to show the audience the support that he's had. The crowd goes silent, in shock that the rumor of Brad actually having a Smoochum was true, and Vitzo interprets this silence to be the crowd being mad that Brad had a Smoochum, and Vitzo begins to get depressed, thinking that now he had lost his job, as Brad would now be a super unpopular movie star, so therefore, Vitzo wouldn't be able to be his manager anymore. He begins to scold Brad for revealing his Smoochum to the crowd, only for the crowd to then stop being silent and instead cheer once again. Since while Brad revealing Smoochum did somewhat tarnish his image of being a tough action hero, the crowd of fangirls actually preferred this, as it meant that they now saw Brad as a super tender guy who really loved his Smoochum, and they just obsessed over that. stating how the tenderness of Brad and the loveliness of Smoochum went together immensely well, and they then clapped for both Brad and Smoochum, pleasing Brad since he now knew that he could be his true self with Smoochum and he wouldn't lose his fame as a result. As for Witzel, when he saw that the audience was actually pleased by Smoochum, he ran up on stage and claimed that it was his idea to have Brad reveal his Smoochum to the audience, stating that from now on, Brad and Smoochum would do every show together, with Smoochum being Brad's official partner. The crowd cheers for this, immensely happy, as Witzel then went backstage and called himself a genius for coming up with the idea to make Smoochum Brad's partner, and claims that he always knew that Smoochum would be the right choice for Brad's partner, and how Brad going with a more sensitive angle would be beneficial to him. This causes Ash and the gang to sigh in annoyance, since Witzel was now pretending like he never disliked Smoochum at all, and always liked it, which definitely wasn't the case. Ash and the gang then watch from backstage as the applause stops and the crowd eventually departs, leaving Brad to then come backstage with his Smoochum himself and thank Ash and the gang for helping him reunite with Smoochum in the first place. Ash responds that it was no big deal, and he was just glad to have helped Brad reunite with Smoochum anyways, leading Brad to stop Ash and the gang as they were about to leave, impressed by their modesty, and he then offers to give Ash something as a reward for Ash's modesty. Ash gets excited, hoping that it was Brad offering him a starring role in one of his new movies. But Brad clarifies that the reward was something that his Smoochum wanted to give Ash, which was a kiss. So Smoochum jumps out of Brad's arms and tries to kiss Ash, and Ash doesn't want this, so he tries to run down the stairs that led from backstage to the rest of the stadium. However, Smoochum follows him down the stairs, causing Ash to fall down in panic, allowing Smoochum to kiss him. Ash then complains why Smoochum was only kissing him and not Misty and Brock as well, with Brad revealing that Smoochum only wanted to kiss Ash. Aww. Several of the crowd members, who were still departing, laughed as they saw Ash fall down the stairs, and Brock and Misty laughed as well, as they stated that Ash really should have got a role in Brad's new movie as a stuntman, making fun of Ash's fall. After this, Ash and the gang then depart as they go to a Pokémon Center to spend the night, deciding to go to the movie theater to see Brad's most recent movie that they had saw advertised earlier. However, in the morning, when they arrive at the theater, the first thing they see on the projection screen is, of course, not the movie, but some advertisements, including an advertisement for Brad's newest movie that was coming out, that showed both Brad and Smoochum now co-stars in the movie, as Smoochum helped Brad as he crossed a cliff and looked at a waterfall. Ash and the gang want Brad's new gentle persona with Smoochum to really help his career and not potentially damage it with people not accepting the fact that he wasn't a pure action star anymore, so they decide to run out of the theater and go promote Brad's new movie free of charge. However, there was no need to do any promotion, as all of Brad's fangirls already knew about Brad's new movie with Smoochum, and they were all overjoyed that Smoochum was now going to be Brad's co-star, so happy that they had all bought some Smoochum dolls, seemingly obsessed with Smoochum at this point. Ash and the gang were surprised at just how well Brad's fans had accepted Smoochum, and remarked that now it seemed like they cared more about Smoochum than Brad itself, so instead of Smoochum being Brad's co-star, it seemed as though Brad would be Smoochum's co-star. Ash and the gang then leave the town, remarking how they were proud of Brad for standing up to his manager and making sure that he put his Smoochum before his fame. And the episode ends with Smoochum looking out the stadium window and somehow managing to see Ash and the gang and blowing them a kiss as they fully exit this town.